ね、年間製造リットルおよび本数、どうだろう。
Our annual production at Ben Nevis is about 1.5 million litres per annum. In bottles, we're doing approximately 40,000 cases per year, 40,000 cases of 12 bottles.
次の質問は、輸出ベスト5、最後に日本はどうかな。
Obviously, we're a Japanese-owned company, so our best whiskey market is Japan. They take Joryo blended whiskey, approximately 30,000 cases per annum. Our other markets would be mainly in Europe and the UK. And obviously, Japan's position is number one. It's very important to Ben Nevis distillery. Thank you.
このモルトをメインとしているブレンデッド、まあそこに出てますけどね。
Well, again, I mentioned Joryo. This is the most important blend for Ben Nevis. Ben Nevis is central to that blend and is an important part of the blend. And as I say, very important in Japan and very important to our market and our business in Scotland. Thank you.
ブレンドの輸出先、ベスト5、ちょっと今増えてたかな、日本。
We have difficulty in keeping records on which is the best markets other than Japan. Japan is far and away the best market because of our connection with Nika, because they own the company. As I say, Joryo is our most important blend, and Japan is the number one country for that product. Thank you.
このモルトの性格、それからその他の蒸留所と異なる点。
The Ben Nevis malt, our 10-year-old malt, is our standard and perhaps our flagship product. It's quite unique. It's not so light as a Speyside malt and not quite as heavy or as peated as the Islay malts. Geographically, we are located halfway between Speyside and Islay, and I like to think that our whisky is very similar, that it's halfway between an Islay and a Speyside. A very characterful malt with raisins, chocolates, that type of flavours. The other malts that we have are a 25-year-old single cask version. We do the Glencoe, which is an 8-year-old blended malt. We've the standard 10-year-old, as I mentioned, and we've just recently brought out the Ben Nevis Traditional, which was produced in traditional lines using brewer's yeast, peated malt, and the matured in sherry casks. It's a young whisky. There's no age statement on it, just to match the old whiskies from 1882 that we have an existing bottle, an original bottle in our store. Thank you.
息子に自身がよく飲むウイスキー。
I've been in the industry a long time, and my first manager advised me if I wished to stay in the industry, I needed to be careful as to how much whiskey I should drink. So I'm not a heavy whiskey drinker, but I must say that I do enjoy Ben Nevis as a malt whiskey and as a distillery. I've worked in distilleries all my working life, and now I've worked at Ben Nevis since 1983, and Ben Nevis means a lot to me personally. Thank you.
今までで最高のウイスキーは。
Well, again, because I have worked more than half my life, working life at Ben Nevis, the Ben Nevis whiskey means more to me than anything. It's I regarded it when I came here. My family were growing up. My son and daughter were coming on to teenagers and had left home when I started to work for, or were ready to leave home when I started to work for Ben Nevis under Japanese ownership. And Ben Nevis has been to me like my second family. Thank you.
ロスコイン自身のウイスキー業界の、経歴を聞きたいんですね。
I started out in the whiskey industry in 1965. Started working for Chivas Brothers at Strathisland Distillery, Keith Bond, then back into Strathisland Distillery in production, started in the offices, then into production about 1967 through until 1971, and I left Chivas to become head brewer at the Long John's Tormore Distillery, where I worked for almost 13 years and was transferred by Long John to manage Ben Nevis Distillery in 1983, and in 1987 Long John transferred me to Lefroy to manage that distillery for 2 years, and just at that time Nika had purchased Ben Nevis Distillery and asked if I would come back and operate the distillery for them, and I was delighted to do so. The only other distillery I've worked at within my career was on relief management duties at Glenugie Distillery at Peterhead. So I think that's my career in terms of numbers of distilleries in which I've worked. Thank you.
モルトスターを使っているかということと、それから、ppm どのぐらいあるか。
With standard Ben Nevis, we use a lightly peated, typical Speyside malt, and we source our malt from all the UK maltsters. The heavily peated malt, it's about 30 ppm that we get, and again sourced from UK maltsters. Thank you.
樽の種類どのぐらいにあります？あと何回ぐらい使いますか？一樽で。
The casks that we use at Ben Nevis, we use a high proportion of refill casks, but we also supplement that with fresh bourbon barrels that we buy direct from the United States. We also use the services of our Japanese company to source fresh sherry casks from Spain. We have in the past used sherry type casks from South Africa, and we use some red wine casks. We're currently experimenting with Marsala wood, and we're going to try some rum finishes. We have in the past used port pipes, and these have proven to be very successful. In the past, I believe that Ben Nevis was matured in claret casks back in the 1800s, late 1800s, and we are still trying to source some good claret casks to experiment with. But we believe that it's an ongoing process looking at the type of wood that we use for maturing our whiskey. Thank you.
シングルバッテッド、その効果は。
I don't understand the single vatting question really, but we had a customs and excise officer here who insisted that if any casks were emptied, put through the vat, we had to call it a vatted malt. So even though it's Ben Nevis and the single product, it has been, sometimes it has been vatted. But the one thing that we have that's quite different at Ben Nevis is that we have we had a 40-year-old Ben Nevis that was produced from both grain whisky and malt whisky, both of which were produced at Ben Nevis Distillery. These whiskies were actually blended as new make spirit. Blended at birth was the term used by the owners of the company at the time, and this was a very successful bottling. Thank you.